Ambassador Jin Woo took a deep breath as the airlock hissed open. His black diplomatic uniform felt heavier than usual, the golden earth insignia on his chest catching the strange light filtering through the station's transparent walls. Behind him, 3 other humans shuffled nervously. His aide Hyejin, security chief Dongmin, and xenobiologist So Young. The neutral space station convergence was unlike anything humanity had ever built. Stretching 15 kilometers from end to end, it rotated majestically against the cosmic backdrop of 3 binary stars that painted everything in shifting hues of blue, orange, and deep purple. Crystalline spires jutted out at impossible angles, each one humming with energy that made Jinwoo's teeth ache. The architecture defied human understanding, corridors that curved upward into infinity, rooms that seemed bigger inside than outside, and gravity that shifted direction based on which species needed to walk on the walls. "This place makes me dizzy," whispered Dongmin, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm before catching himself. Weapons were strictly forbidden in council space. "Stay calm," Jin Woo replied quietly. "Remember, we're representing all of humanity today. 300 years of dreaming about this moment." Their footsteps echoed strangely as they walked through corridors filled with beings that belonged in humanity's wildest science fiction. A creature that looked like a walking tree with glowing fruit for eyes drifted past, its roots clicking against the metal floor. Nearby, something resembling a jellyfish made of pure electricity floated in a specialized containment field, occasionally sparking with what their translators interpreted as polite acknowledgement. The grand ceremonial hall stretched before them like a cathedral built by mad gods. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, while the floor was a mosaic of materials from 1,000 different worlds. Floating platforms drifted at various heights, each one maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions for different species. Some platforms bubbled with thick, soupy air, others crackled with electrical discharges. A few seemed to contain nothing but swirling mist. "Look at them all," breathed Hyejin, pulling out her recording device before remembering it had been confiscated at security. "There must be representatives from 50 different worlds here." Jinwoo nodded, trying to maintain diplomatic composure while his mind raced. The Zephyrians dominated the center platform, their bodies resembling living crystal formations that caught and refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. Each one stood nearly 3 meters tall, their faceted surfaces shifting colors as they moved. When they walked, it sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. To the left, the Nebulaxi swirled, within their containment suits like captured storms. Their gaseous forms constantly shifted between different shapes, sometimes humanoid, sometimes resembling abstract art. Occasionally, lightning would arc between different parts of their bodies, and their translators would convert these electrical patterns into words. The Chithrax delegation occupied the rightmost platform, and Jinwoo had to suppress a shudder. Each one was roughly human-sized, but built like a nightmare version of a praying mantis. Their exoskeletons gleamed with an oily sheen, and their compound eyes tracked every movement in the room. When they clicked their mandibles, it created a rhythm that somehow managed to sound both threatening and oddly musical. But it was the smaller species that truly captured Jinwoo's attention. Tiny beings no bigger than his thumb zipped around the chamber on gossamer wings, leaving trails of sparkling dust. Something that looked like a walking flower arrangement swayed gently on a nearby platform, its petals opening and closing in, response to the ambient sound levels. In one corner, a species that resembled metallic spiders worked frantically on some kind of technological device, their multiple limbs moving in perfect coordination. "Honored Terrans," a voice suddenly resonated through the hall, and every conversation stopped instantly. The words seemed to come from everywhere at once, bypassing their ears entirely and appearing directly in their minds through the translation matrix embedded in the station's walls. Chancellor Velthar stepped forward from among the Zephyrians, and Jinwoo realized this being was different from the others. Where the other Zephyrians shifted through the entire spectrum of visible light, Velthar's crystalline form contained depths of color that seemed to extend beyond what human eyes could process. Looking at the Chancellor was like staring into a rainbow that had been folded in on itself a dozen times. "We welcome you to the council with our most sacred tradition," Velthar continued, and Jinwu noticed that every other species in the chamber had gone completely still. Even the tiny flying creatures had stopped their constant motion, hovering motionlessly in the air. A servant approached, though calling it a servant seemed inadequate. The being moved with fluid grace, its body resembling liquid mercury that had learned to walk upright. In its constantly shifting hands, it carried an ornate goblet that seemed to have been carved from a single piece of black diamond. The cup itself appeared to bend light around it, creating optical illusions that made Jinwu's eyes water. The liquid inside defied description. It moved like mercury, but seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a darkness so complete it appeared solid. Occasionally, tiny sparks of what might have been energy would dance across its surface before being swallowed by the surrounding blackness. "Essence of void," Velthar announced, and Jinwu swore he could hear genuine reverence in the artificial voice. "The ultimate gesture of trust between species. Will you share this bond with us?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jinwu became acutely aware that every single being in the chamber was watching him with an intensity that bordered on the supernatural. The Chithrax had stopped their constant clicking entirely. The Nebulaxy's electrical discharges had ceased. Even the background hum of the station's systems seemed muted. Ye-Jin grabbed his arm so tightly her knuckles went white. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "our briefings never mentioned anything about drinking rituals." So Young stepped forward, slightly, her scientific training overriding diplomatic protocol. "Ambassador, I haven't had time to analyze that substance. We have no idea what it might do to human physiology." Jinwu stared at the goblet, acutely aware that humanity's entire future in galactic politics might depend on his next decision. The liquid seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm, and he could swear he felt heat radiating from it, despite being 3 meters away. The silence stretched on, becoming uncomfortable. He could feel the weight of expectation from dozens of alien species, each one waiting to see how humanity would respond to this ultimate test of trust. Jinwu reached for the goblet, his hand steady, despite the chaos in his mind. Jinwu's fingers wrapped around the goblet, and immediately he felt the strange weight of it. The black diamond material was surprisingly warm to the touch, almost alive somehow. The liquid inside seemed heavier than water, clinging to the crystalline walls like honey mixed with motor oil. When he tilted it slightly, the substance moved, in slow hypnotic waves that seemed to defy gravity. The assembled aliens pressed closer, their various forms of breathing creating a symphony of whistles, clicks, and electrical hums. A small creature that looked like a walking flower began to glow brighter, its petals opening wider as if trying to absorb every detail of what was about to happen. The metallic spider beings in the corner had completely abandoned their work. All 8 of their glowing eyes focused on Jinwu with laser intensity. "Ambassador," Ye-Jin whispered desperately, her voice barely audible through the translation matrix. "Maybe we should ask for more time to new friendships," Jinwu interrupted, raising the goblet toward Chancellor Velthar. The words echoed through the vast chamber, bouncing off the impossible architecture and returning as whispers from a dozen different directions. Without hesitation, he tilted the goblet back and drank the entire contents in one smooth motion. The first thing that hit him was the temperature. The liquid felt like molten lava flowing down his throat, but strangely it didn't actually burn his mouth or tongue. Instead, it created a sensation like drinking liquid electricity mixed with the strongest alcohol he'd ever encountered. The taste was indescribable. Imagine mixing battery acid with rocket fuel, then adding the worst homemade soju his grandfather had ever concocted during those long winters in the Korean mountains. The substance traveled down his throat. Jinwu felt every nerve ending in his body light up simultaneously. His vision sharpened to an almost painful degree, allowing him to see details in the alien faces around him that he'd never noticed before. He could count individual facets in the Zephyrian's crystalline skin, observe the microscopic electrical storms dancing through the Nebulaxy's gaseous forms, and even detect the subtle color changes in the Chithrax's compound eyes. The liquid hit his stomach like a small explosion, sending waves of heat throughout his entire body. For a moment, Jinwoo wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. His heart rate spiked, and he could feel his liver working overtime to process whatever alien chemistry was now coursing through his bloodstream. But then, surprisingly, the burning sensation began to fade. It reminded him of that time his uncle Min-soo had challenged him to drink a full bottle of homemade mountain liquor during the harvest festival. That had burned worse than this, and he'd survived that with nothing more than a spectacular hangover and some very embarrassing stories. "Interesting," Jinwoo said calmly, setting the empty goblet down on the servant's tray with a gentle clink. He could feel every alien eye in the chamber tracking his movements. "It has quite a kick. Is there more?" The silence that followed was so complete that Jinwoo could hear the subtle hum of the station's artificial gravity generators 3 decks below. Even the constant background chatter of alien languages had ceased entirely. The small flying creatures had frozen mid-flight, hovering motionlessly like tiny jeweled statues suspended in air. Chancellor Velthar's crystalline form had gone completely colorless, becoming as transparent as window glass. The Nebulaxi delegates had stopped their constant swirling, their gaseous forms condensing into tight shocked spheres within their containment suits. The Chithrax had drawn their limbs close to their bodies, in what their cultural briefings had described as extreme defensive postures. Medical Officer Theiss moved faster than Jinwoo had thought possible for such a tall, ethereal being. The alien's forearms moved in perfect coordination, activating scanning devices that materialized from hidden compartments throughout the chamber. Beams of colored light swept over Jinwoo from multiple angles, and holographic displays sprang to life, showing readouts in languages he couldn't understand. The medical officer's 4 hands were trembling visibly as they recalibrated scanner after scanner, each device producing results that made no sense according to galactic medical science. Jinwoo's cellular structure remained completely intact. His organs were functioning normally. His liver showed elevated activity, similar to what human doctors might see after someone had consumed a large amount of alcohol, but nothing approaching the complete molecular breakdown they had expected. "This cannot be," Theiss whispered, their voice carrying harmonics that the translator couldn't quite process. "Essence of void dissolves organic matter at the molecular level. It breaks down cellular walls, destroys DNA structures, and converts a living tissue into basic chemical compounds. You should be—" They paused, unable to complete the sentence. "Dead," Chancellor Velthar finished quietly, their voice carrying a note of something between awe and terror. "You should be very, very dead." Around the chamber, other aliens began making sounds that their translators struggled to interpret. The small flower creature had begun pulsing rapidly between different colors. The metallic spider beings were clicking their limbs together in rapid patterns that created an almost musical rhythm. Even the tiny flying creatures had resumed their movement, but now they were circling Jinwoo at a respectful distance, leaving trails of sparkling dust that seemed to glow brighter than before. Jinwoo shrugged, the gesture looking almost comically casual in the face of the cosmic impossibility he had just performed. "Tastes like really strong baekseju. My uncle Min-soo brews something similar back home in the mountains, though his has more of a ginseng aftertaste." He paused thoughtfully, then added, "Actually, this is smoother going down. Uncle's stuff could strip paint off a spacecraft hull." The aliens stared at him as if he had just claimed he could breathe in the vacuum of space or swim through a black hole. Several of the smaller species had begun making rapid chittering sounds that the translators were rendering as various expressions of disbelief and scientific impossibility. Hyejin grabbed Jinwoo's arm, her medical scanner showing his vital signs were not only stable but actually slightly improved from baseline. "Sir, how do you feel? Any pain, nausea, burning sensations?" "Fine," Jinwoo replied honestly. "Maybe a little warm, but nothing worse than after a good meal at that barbecue place in Gangnam." He looked around at the stunned alien faces surrounding him. "Did I do something wrong? Was I supposed to sip it slowly?" The question seemed to break whatever spell had fallen over the chamber. Suddenly, dozens of alien voices began speaking at once, creating a cacophony that overloaded the translation systems and filled the air with fragments of sentences, in languages that sounded like music, static, and mathematical equations all mixed together. Medical Officer Theiss was frantically taking readings with devices Jin Woo didn't recognize, muttering in their native language while occasionally switching to Galactic Standard. Metabolic rate normal, cellular integrity perfect, liver function elevated but stable. This defies everything we know about biochemistry. Jin Woo smiled politely and asked the question that would change humanity's place in the galaxy forever. So, what's for dinner? The emergency call had gone out across 17 star systems within minutes of Jin Woo's impossible survival. Dr. Kesra, the galaxy's most celebrated xenobiologist, had been conducting research on a mining colony 3 sectors away when the priority message reached them. The alien scientist had immediately commandeered the fastest ship available, a sleek Zephyrian courier vessel that could bend space-time around itself, and arrived at Convergence Station in record time. Now, barely 6 hours after the incident, an entire deck of the massive station had been converted into the most advanced biological research laboratory Jin Woo had ever seen. The walls themselves seemed alive, covered in what looked like organic circuits that pulsed with bioluminescent light. Machines that defied human understanding hummed and clicked throughout the space, some floating freely in the air, while others grew directly from the floor like technological trees. Jin Woo sat in the center of it all, connected to more monitoring devices than he could count. Thin cables snaked across his skin, each one gathering data about his biological processes. Holographic displays surrounded him in a 3-dimensional constellation, showing real-time images of his organs, blood flow, and cellular activity that would have been impossible to achieve with Earth's most advanced medical equipment. Dr. Kesra was unlike any alien Jin Woo had encountered so far. The scientist resembled a cross between an octopus and a piece of living coral, with dozens of flexible appendages that ended in specialized tooltips instead of fingers. Some appendages had microscopic manipulators for delicate work. Others ended in sensor arrays that could analyze chemical compositions, and a few terminated in what appeared to be organic computers that processed data in real time. Fascinating, Dr. Kesra muttered for the 100th time, their translator working overtime to convert the complex scientific observations into human language. 3 of their appendages manipulated holographic displays, while 2 others operated scanning equipment. That looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Your hepatic enzyme production is operating at levels that should be impossible for organic tissue. The doctor's main cluster of eyes, Jin Woo had counted at least 12, focused on a particular display showing his liver in incredible detail. The organ glowed with activity, individual cells visible as they processed and neutralized the essence of void that should have killed him instantly. Your liver isn't just processing the toxin, Dr. Kesra continued, genuine amazement coloring their translated voice. It's dismantling it more efficiently than our most advanced medical nanites. Look at these metabolic pathways. They're completely unique in known biology. Jin, who had refused to leave Jin Woo's side despite multiple requests from station security, leaned forward from her observation chair. She'd been taking notes on a device borrowed from the station's diplomatic corps, trying to record everything for Earth scientists to study later. Is that unusual, Doctor? Dr. Kesera's appendages froze mid-motion, and several of their eyes swiveled to focus on her, with an intensity that made her unconsciously lean back. The silence stretched for several seconds before the translator began conveying something that sounded like a mixture of laughter and complete hysteria. Unusual? Dr. Kesera repeated, their voice rising in pitch until the translator started producing warning tones. Your species has evolved a dedicated organ specifically designed to neutralize poisons and toxins. Do you understand the implications of what this means for galactic biology? Around the laboratory, automated systems began displaying comparison charts showing liver function across dozens of known species. Every other race in the galaxy had basic detoxification capabilities, but nothing approaching the sophisticated chemical processing plant that humans carried in their abdomens. Jin Woo stretched in his chair, careful not to disturb the monitoring cables. After 6 hours of testing, he was getting restless. Does this mean we're hard to kill? Because honestly, that would explain a lot about human history. Hard to kill. Dr. Kessera's appendages began waving wildly, causing several holographic displays to flicker and reorganize themselves. You actively seek out toxins for recreational purposes. Look at these readings. A massive display materialized in the center of the laboratory, showing Jinwoo's blood chemistry in stunning detail. Dozens of different compounds were highlighted, in various colors, each one tagged with information that made the assembled monitoring equipment beep and chirp with what sounded like electronic amazement. Ethanol, a cellular poison that your species consumes in vast quantities for enjoyment. Capsaicin, a neurotoxin that causes pain receptors to fire continuously, which you add to food to make it taste better. Caffeine, a stimulant that would cause cardiac arrest in most species, but you drink it every morning to wake up. Dr. Kessera paused, several appendages pointing at different parts of the display. And these are just the compounds we can identify. Your blood contains traces of alkaloids, tannins, and chemical combinations that don't exist anywhere else in known space. Hyejin blinked, suddenly understanding the magnitude of what they were discussing. You mean other species can't drink alcohol? Or eat spicy food? Or drink coffee? Any one of those substances would require immediate medical intervention for most galactic species, Dr. Kessera replied, their translated voice carrying notes of scientific fascination and existential dread. A single cup of what you call coffee contains enough caffeine to potentially kill a Chithrax warrior. The capsaicin in your hot peppers is used by several species as a non-lethal weapon. The laboratory fell silent, except for the constant humming and clicking of the monitoring equipment. Jinwoo could see his heartbeat displayed on 3 different screens, his brain activity mapped in real time, and his digestive system processing the remnants of his breakfast with mechanical efficiency. So what you're telling me, Jinwoo said slowly, is that humans are basically walking chemical weapons factories who developed a taste for poison. Dr. Kessera's main cluster of eyes focused on him with what could only be described as scientific rapture. That's actually a remarkably accurate assessment. We've been studying toxicology for millennia, developing increasingly sophisticated methods to protect our species from harmful substances. Meanwhile, your entire evolutionary path involved learning to coexist with toxins and eventually incorporating them into your culture. The doctor gestured to a new display showing human agricultural history. You didn't just survive alongside poisonous plants. You cultivated them. You bred them to be more potent. You created entire industries around refining and concentrating toxins for consumption. Well, yes, Hyejin said, her voice getting smaller as she began to grasp the cosmic absurdity of human biology. Drinking is quite popular on Earth, and spicy food, and coffee. We have entire festivals celebrating these things. Dr. Kessera sat down heavily in what appeared to be a chair that had grown from the floor specifically to accommodate their unique physiology. Their multiple appendages drooped with what the translator interpreted as exhaustion mixed with wonder. We've spent our entire civilization trying to develop better antidotes and medical treatments to protect ourselves from harmful substances, they said quietly. Meanwhile, your species evolved alongside poison, learned to process it efficiently, and then decided to make it a cornerstone of your recreational activities. Jinwoo grinned, that same casual smile that had already shaken the foundations of galactic biology. Wait until you hear about our drinking games, or competitive eating contests, or that thing we do where we see who can eat the spiciest pepper without crying. Dr. Kessera made a sound that the translator couldn't process, and several monitoring devices began displaying readings that looked suspiciously like the electronic equivalent of fainting. The news had traveled faster than light itself, carried by quantum communicators, hyperspace relay stations, and the galaxy's most sophisticated information networks. Within 48 hours of Jinwoo's impossible survival, every major civilization in known space had received the same incredible report. A human had consumed essence of void and lived to ask for more. Convergence Station, normally a quiet, diplomatic outpost, had transformed into the busiest location in 3 sectors. Ships arrived hourly. Sleek Zephyrian crystal ships that looked like flying cathedrals, massive Chithrax war vessels bristling with weapons they couldn't use in neutral space, and strange Nebulaxi craft that seemed to be made of solidified storm clouds. The station's docking bays, designed to handle perhaps 20 vessels at once, now hosted over 200 ships of every conceivable design. Jin Woo had become the galaxy's most famous individual overnight. His quarters had been moved to a secure diplomatic suite, but that hadn't stopped the constant stream of visitors, researchers, and what could only be described as alien tourists who wanted to witness the impossible human with their own sensory organs. The testing had evolved from Dr. Kessera's scientific investigation into something resembling a cosmic carnival. The main ceremonial hall had been converted into a research amphitheater, with viewing platforms for dozens of species and enough monitoring equipment to stock a small medical facility. Every test was broadcast live across the galactic networks, drawing audiences that numbered in the billions. Commander Thex of the Chithrax warrior caste had arrived that morning aboard a ship that looked like it could single-handedly conquer a small moon. The insectoid warrior stood nearly 3 meters tall, their exoskeleton polished to mirror brightness and decorated with battle scars that told stories of conflicts across a dozen star systems. In their clawed hands, they held a vial containing something that defied description. "This is Chithrax battle poison," Commander Thex growled, their mandibles clicking with what the translators indicated was mixture of pride and barely contained aggression. The substance in the vial glowed with an aggressive green light and seemed to move independently, flowing upward against gravity and occasionally forming shapes that looked almost like tiny, screaming faces. "One drop of this can fell our greatest. Warriors. It is distilled from the venom of the void serpents of Kethmore, creatures so deadly that even their shadows are toxic." The assembled crowd of researchers, diplomats, and curiosity seekers leaned forward with collective anticipation. Holographic recording devices floating throughout the hall captured every angle, as Jinwoo accepted the vial with the same casual confidence he'd shown throughout the week. He examined the substance briefly, noting how it seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat and emit a faint humming sound that made his fillings vibrate. Without hesitation, he tilted the vial back and downed the entire contents, like taking a shot of soju at a Seoul karaoke bar. The taste hit him immediately, like liquid mint mixed with electricity, and something that reminded him of the really strong cough medicine his grandmother used to give him during winter colds. It created a tingling sensation that started in his throat and spread throughout his entire nervous system, making his fingertips buzz and his vision sharpen to almost supernatural clarity. "Minty," Jinwoo said thoughtfully, setting down the empty vial. "I like it. Has a nice clean aftertaste, very refreshing." Commander Thex stumbled backward so violently that they nearly fell off the platform entirely. The warrior's compound eyes had gone completely black, and they began making rapid clicking sounds that the translators couldn't process fast enough to convert into coherent language. Before the Chithrax could recover from their shock, Elder Prim of the Nebulaxi delegation floated forward in their containment suit. The gaseous being had been alive for over 3,000 years and had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, but nothing had prepared them for what they were about to attempt. "And this," Elder Prim wheezed, their electrical discharges creating patterns of communication that bypassed spoken language entirely, "is concentrated stellar acid. We use it to etch identification numbers into our ship hulls. It can dissolve most known materials in seconds." The substance they presented looked like liquid starlight contained in a specialized crystalline container that was probably worth more than most planets' annual budgets. It moved like mercury, but left trails of light in its wake, and occasionally tiny explosions of energy would dance across its surface like miniature solar flares. Jinwoo accepted the container with appropriate care, noting its surprising warmth, and the way it seemed to vibrate in harmony with his heartbeat. He took a careful sip first, then a larger one as the taste registered. "Smooth finish?" He nodded approvingly, then took another sip to better analyze the flavor profile. "This is really interesting. Reminds me of this place in Seoul that serves the best maggioli I've ever had. Similar texture, though this has more of a metallic note, and it's definitely warmer going down." Elder Prim began making sounds that no translator in the galaxy had ever encountered before. The electrical patterns dancing through their gaseous form became so complex that their containment suit systems started overloading. Several nearby monitoring devices began displaying readings that looked suspiciously like the electronic equivalent of a religious experience. By the end of the week, what had started as scientific investigation had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history, the first interspecies drinking competition. Representatives from dozens of civilizations had arrived with their most dangerous substances, each one convinced that they would finally find the limit of human toxin tolerance. The Silicate Collective brought crystallized poison gas that could dissolve organic matter from the inside out. Jinwoo described it as fizzy, like really strong carbonated water with a chemical aftertaste. The Hive Mind Syndicate presented a neurotoxin so potent that it was banned as a weapon of mass destruction. By 17 different galactic treaties, Jinwoo compared it favorably to a particularly potent batch of moonshine his uncle used to make. Machine intelligences arrived with synthetic compounds designed to shut down biological processes at the molecular level. Interdimensional entities brought substances that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Energy beings contributed pure radiation concentrated into liquid form. Jinwoo sampled them all with the enthusiasm of a wine connoisseur at a tasting event. Hyejin had given up trying to take detailed notes after the third day. Instead, she found herself managing what had essentially become a galactic media circus. News crews from 100 different worlds crowded the observation decks, broadcasting live coverage to audiences that included entire planetary populations glued to their communication devices. "Sir," she said quietly during a brief break between tests, watching as a delegation of robotic entities wheeled in containers marked with symbols that their translators rendered as "absolutely do not consume under any circumstances. I think we might have accidentally become famous." Jinwoo looked around the transformed ceremonial hall, now packed with alien beings who watched his every move with the intensity usually reserved for religious ceremonies. A group of Zephyrian researchers were carefully collecting drops of his saliva with equipment that looked expensive enough to purchase small moons. The Chithrax delegation had begun treating him with the kind of respect usually reserved for legendary warriors. The Nebulaxi had started incorporating his name into their electrical prayer patterns. "Well," he said with the same casual smile that had already revolutionized galactic biology, "at least it's better than starting a war, though I have to admit I'm getting pretty curious about what they're going to bring tomorrow." In the distance, more ships were arriving at the station's overwhelmed docking facilities, each one carrying representatives who had traveled across the galaxy for the chance to witness the impossible human who had turned the fundamental laws of biochemistry into a drinking game. 3 months had transformed everything. What began as humanity's first nervous diplomatic mission to the stars had evolved into the most significant shift in galactic politics in over 1,000 years. Convergence Station, once a quiet, neutral meeting point, had become the unofficial capital of interspecies cooperation, with permanent research facilities, cultural exchange centers, and what the galaxy now called the Human Tolerance Testing Labs. Jinwoo adjusted his new uniform as he walked through corridors that had been completely redesigned to accommodate the constant flow of alien visitors. Gone was the simple black diplomatic outfit. He now wore the deep blue and silver of the Galactic Council's newly created Hazardous Materials Division, with golden insignia that marked him as humanity's first official xenobiological consultant. The ceremonial hall had been expanded twice to handle the representatives from over 300 species who had requested to attend today's historic session. Floating platforms filled the vast space in complex three-dimensional arrangements, each one maintaining perfect environmental conditions for different forms of life. The air itself had been carefully engineered to support dozens of different respiratory systems simultaneously. As Jinwoo took his place at the central podium, he could see the remarkable changes that had occurred throughout the galaxy. The Chithrax delegation, once viewed as aggressive warriors, now wore modified armor with built-in toxin detection systems. a technology they'd developed specifically for working alongside humans. The Zephyrians had established an entire research institute dedicated to studying human biochemistry, their crystalline forms now displaying new colors that their scientists claimed were inspired by human liver enzyme patterns. Chancellor Velthar approached the speaking platform, their crystalline form now incorporating flecks of deep amber that hadn't been there 3 months ago. The change, according to Zephyrian customs, indicated profound respect for another species, the first time such an honor had been granted to anyone outside their own civilization. "The trade compact is unanimous," Chancellor Velthar announced, their voice carrying harmonics that resonated through every translation system in the chamber. After 3 months of unprecedented cooperation and scientific discovery, humanity will be granted full council membership with special status in toxic waste management, substance testing, and environmental hazard cleanup. The contracts that materialized as holographic displays throughout the chamber were unlike anything in galactic history. Human colonies would receive the most advanced terraforming technology available, including atmospheric processes that could transform dead worlds into garden paradises in decades rather than centuries. In exchange, human teams would handle industrial accidents, environmental disasters, and hazardous material cleanup operations that had previously been impossible for other species to approach. The economic implications were staggering. The Spiral Mining Consortium, which had lost 3 entire star systems to toxic contamination over the past century, had already signed exclusive contracts with human cleanup crews. The Voidwalker Collective, notorious for their reckless industrial practices, had agreed to pay premium prices for human oversight of their most dangerous operations. But perhaps most remarkably, human researchers would gain unrestricted access to the galaxy's greatest libraries, laboratories, and research facilities. Universities that had guarded their secrets for millennia were now competing to offer exchange programs with Earth's scientists. The potential for technological advancement was beyond anything humanity had dared to imagine. Additionally, Dr. Kessera announced, rising from their specialized platform, the newly established Interspecies Biological Research Initiative would like to propose comprehensive cultural exchange programs to study what we have termed recreational toxin consumption among human populations. The phrase had become galactic shorthand for humanity's unique relationship with substances that were lethal to other species. Entire academic disciplines had emerged around studying human drinking customs, spicy food preferences, and caffeine consumption patterns. 3 different species had established anthropological research stations on Earth specifically to observe humans in their natural habitat of bars, restaurants, and coffee shops. Jin Wu smiled as a servant approached with the ceremonial goblet that had become traditional for these occasions. Today's offering was something the Zephyrians called hull dissolver, a substance they used for emergency repairs on starships, capable of eating through several feet of reinforced metal in minutes. To Jin Wu, it tasted remarkably similar to his favorite soju from that little place in Gangnam, though with a slightly more pronounced metallic aftertaste. To new partnerships, he said, raising the goblet toward the assembled delegates, and to the understanding that sometimes the strangest traits make the strongest bonds. Around the chamber, hundreds of alien beings watched in fascination as he drank the substance that could literally melt through starship armor. The sight had become almost routine over the past 3 months, but it still generated the same sense of wonder and impossible possibility that had characterized humanity's entire introduction to galactic society. The other delegates raised their own species-appropriate beverages in response, carefully formulated nutrient solutions, energy supplements, and atmospheric gases that provided sustenance without risking accidental poisoning. Meanwhile, the human delegation casually shared bottles of Earth whiskey, Korean soju, and something Dongmin had brought from his hometown that he claimed could wake the dead. The galaxy had coined a term for these human beverages: Terran courage water. What had started as a joke had evolved into a mark of respect. Several species had even attempted to create synthetic versions of human alcohol, though none had managed to replicate the precise combination of toxicity and enjoyment that made human drinking culture so fascinating to xenobiologists. As the ceremony concluded and delegates began networking in smaller groups, Jin Woo found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. Humanity had arrived at the stars expecting to compete with advanced civilizations through superior technology or military might. Instead, they had earned their place in the galactic community through something far more unexpected: their ability to metabolize poison and ask for seconds. The implications extended far beyond simple biology. Human colonies were already being established in star systems that other species considered uninhabitable due to atmospheric toxins or contaminated soil. Human workers were commanding premium wages for handling materials that required full environmental suits for other species to approach safely. Human restaurants were becoming tourist destinations where adventurous aliens could observe the impossible spectacle of recreational toxin consumption. Dr. Kesra approached with their characteristic enthusiasm, several appendages carrying data tablets displaying the latest research results. Ambassador, the preliminary results from the Earth study missions are extraordinary. Your species doesn't just tolerate toxins, you've created an entire cultural framework around them. Festivals celebrating spicy food, social bonding through alcohol consumption, entire industries built around caffeinated beverages. And, Hyejin added, joining the conversation with her own stack of diplomatic reports, we've received formal requests from 47 different species asking to establish cultural exchange programs. Apparently, the concept of happy hour has become the subject of academic papers across 3 sectors. Jinwoo laughed, the sound carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic systems and drawing pleased reactions from several alien species who had learned to associate human laughter with positive outcomes. In the end, it hadn't been humanity's technology that opened the stars to them, nor their weapons or their diplomacy. It had been something far simpler and far more uniquely human, their remarkable ability to find joy in things that should have killed them. As the celebration continued around them, with alien researchers taking notes on human social drinking behaviors and Chithrak's warriors respectfully requesting permission to analyze human saliva samples, Jin Woo raised his glass one more time. This toast was silent, personal, and directed toward the impossible universe that had made humans the galaxy's most valuable species simply because they had evolved the most effective liver in known space. The end.